So I want you to imagine you are an ancient king.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. You're wearing the ceremonial garments, you've got the elevated throne, and, your people are looking up at you with this absolute terrifying reverence.
They think you're everything.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But there is a massive, massive problem. The harvest has failed completely. The rivers are drying up, the mud is cracking into those jagged little puzzle pieces, and the sun is just beating down on your village day after brutal day.
A total disaster for an agrarian society.
Yeah, and the craziest part is your people. They aren't gathering in the town square to, pray to you for rain.
No, they're definitely not praying.
No, they are gathering to drag you out of your palace and literally execute you.
It's a rough gig.
It is,
Yeah.
because they genuinely believe that you simply forgot how to pull the mechanical lever that makes the rain fall from the sky. And welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so thrilled you're joining us today because we are unpacking what has to be one of the most monumental, just mind-bending theories of human intellectual evolution ever put to paper.
It really is a massive shift in perspective.
It totally is.
Yeah.
We're exploring the extensive index of James George Fraser's seminal work, The Golden Bough. Specifically, we've been poring over that 12th volume, the Index and Bibliography, which is basically this incredible treasure map to Fraser's whole intellectual universe.
Right. It outlines his entire thesis in this really condensed, fascinating way.
Exactly. And the core mission, the question we are putting in front of you today, is this. How did our ancestors go from believing they could literally, physically manipulate the universe with their bare hands to humbling themselves and bowing before invisible deities?
Well, to answer that, we really have to completely dismantle how we currently view the world, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because Fraser posits this very specific, and I should say highly controversial, blueprint of human thought. He maps out this grand trajectory that passes through three distinct massive eras.
The big three.
Exactly. It begins with magic, transitions through religion, and ultimately moves toward science. And today, we're going to look really closely at the intricate, incredibly messy, and deeply antagonistic relationship between those first two stages.
The magic and the religion parts.
Right. Fraser doesn't see magic and religion as isolated concepts just sort of existing in a vacuum. He identifies them as a sequential evolution of how humans try to understand, navigate, and ultimately control their reality.
So if we're going to dive into that evolution, I feel like we have to start with the premise that just completely shatters all our modern assumptions.
It definitely flips the script.
Because, we assume religion is the oldest human institution, We assume that the very first time an early human looked up at a thunderstorm, they immediately thought, oh, there is a big guy in the sky throwing lightning.
That's the common assumption, yeah. That personifying nature came first.
But the text argues the exact opposite. It says that magic is actually older than religion. Before there were any gods to pray to at all, humanity existed entirely in what Fraser calls the Age of Magic.
Yeah, and in this ancient era, the whole concept of a conscious, personal deity running the universe, it simply hadn't formed in the human mind yet.
They weren't even thinking in those terms.
Exactly. Instead, humans operated under the assumption that the world was governed by impersonal, immutable forces.
Impersonal being the key word there.
Right. These forces weren't judging you. They weren't listening to your prayers or answering them. They were just phenomena that could be directly controlled, provided you possessed the correct formula.
So it's like early humans were treating the universe like a giant machine, right? With hidden levers.
That's a really good way to put it.
If you want a specific outcome, you don't ask the machine for a favor. You don't negotiate with a vending machine, right? You just pull the correct lever.
Yeah.
If I pull the rain lever, the rain gear turns and water falls.
That mechanical analogy is absolutely central to Fraser's thesis. Magic, according to the text, operates on a strict physical basis. He describes it as being driven by, and this is his phrase, misapplications of the association of ideas.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, the human brain is fundamentally an association machine. We are biologically wired to recognize patterns. When two things happen in sequence, our brains immediately try to link them with a causal arrow.
Cause and effect.
Exactly. Magic is basically primitive humanity's attempt to systematize those associations into a working science of survival.
They just got the associations entirely, completely wrong.
Very wrong.
Which brings us to how they actually pull these levers. Because the text breaks this early magic down into two massive branches.
Right. The first being homeopathic magic.
Or imitative magic, yeah. And the underlying logic here is, honestly, brilliantly simple. It's just like produces like, if I want an effect, I just have to imitate that effect.
It's imitation as compulsion.
Exactly. So put yourself in the shoes of someone standing in that dry, dying field we talked about in the intro. You don't know anything about, atmospheric pressure or evaporation or meteorology. You just know what rain looks like and what it sounds like.
So you look for the associated phenomena, and the index is practically overflowing with vivid global examples of this.
There really is. Like, what were some of the wilder ones we saw?
Well, we see extensive references to rainmaking ceremonies that rely entirely on imitation. People would mimic the gathering of dark clouds by wearing very dark, heavy clothing, or they'd burn specific smoking materials to imitate cloud cover.
They're literally playing dress up as a storm.
Exactly. And they would imitate the wildlife associated with wet weather, too. If rain causes frogs to croak and ducks to splash in puddles, the homeopathic logic reverses that causal arrow.
Right, so instead of rain making the frogs croak.
The belief is that if you can force a frog to croak, or if you just perfectly imitate that croak yourself, the universe has absolutely no choice but to produce the associated rain. The imitation compels the reality.
It's a completely reverse-engineered reality.
Right.
And it extends to everything, right? Not just the weather.
Oh, absolutely everything.
Like, if you want to injure an enemy from a distance, you don't just throw a rock blindly into the dark. You make a magical image of them. The text talks a lot about fashioning wax figures.
A classic voodoo doll concept, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. You manipulate the imitation. Maybe you pierce the wax figure with a bone needle.
Yeah.
And because, produces, the universe applies that physical manipulation to your actual physical enemy.
And we also see this used for positive outcomes, like trying to win love.
Right. You create an imitation of the person you're pining for. You bind the figure to yourself with a string or something. And the universe is supposed to mirror that binding in reality.
The internal consistency of this logic is what makes it so pervasive. It dictated entirely how early humans interacted with the animal kingdom, too, particularly regarding the acquisition of traits.
Oh, the eating of the animal parts? This was wild.
Yes. The sources note that diviners, warriors, and leaders would consume very specific parts of animals to gain their physical or perceived mystical attributes. They would eat the hearts of crows, or moles, or ox.
Because a hawk has incredible, piercing vision. So the logic is, if you consume the core of the hawk, you are literally consuming the essence of that vision.
Exactly. And furthermore, this mindset creates a deeply rigid set of rules for how people, especially leaders, could live their lives.
The taboos.
Right. Consider the historical examples regarding ancient kings who were strictly forbidden from shaving their hair or even cutting their nails for an entire year.
Wait, a whole year? That sounds incredibly unsanitary.
It was, but the reasoning was purely magical. Hair is a potent symbol of continuous growth, strength, and vitality. By the laws of homeopathic association, to cut the king's hair would be to sever the king's power.
Which would then magically drain the vitality of the entire kingdom.
Precisely. The imitation of cutting equals the reality of weakening.
Man, that sets up a wildly stressful existence for the king, which we are definitely going to dig into more. But first, we have to look at the second branch of this primitive operating system.
Contagious magic.
Right. If homeopathic magic is about similarity, contagious magic is all about contact. The rule is, and this is a quote, things which have once been in physical contact with each other continue to act on each other at a distance, permanently, even after the physical connection is completely broken.
Contagious magic relies on this idea of a hidden sympathetic bond.
A sympathetic bond. Okay, so how does that play out?
Well, the physical separation of two objects does not sever the metaphysical tether between them. And this fundamentally altered how early humans approached medicine and injury. The text highlights this phenomenon that appears in wildly distinct cultures, from rural England all the way to the islands of Melanesia.
It's everywhere.
It really is. It documents a sympathetic relationship between a wound and the weapon that caused it.
Okay, let's really visualize this for the listener, because it highlights just how alien this mindset is to us today.
It's a huge leap.
Right, so imagine a warrior gets stabbed with a rusty spear. In our modern scientific framework, all our attention obviously goes to the wound, right? We clean it, we stitch it, we bandage the arm.
Biological cause and effect.
Exactly. But under contagious magic, the weapon and the wound were in intimate physical contact, so they are forever linked.
The tether is established.
Yeah. So the healer doesn't agonize over the bleeding arm. The healer takes the actual rusty spear, meticulously cleans the blade, applies soothing medicinal salves to the iron of the spear, and carefully wraps the weapon in bandages.
They are treating the source of the contagion to heal the effect.
That is it's a stunning display of treating the metaphysical bond rather than the biological reality.
And this bond of contact creates a pervasive kind of low-level paranoia in everyday life, especially regarding a person's physical choices. The index is absolutely saturated with references to the magic of footprints.
Okay, wait, hold on. Because I can almost kind of wrap my head around the spear thing. I mean, it literally has the victim's blood on it, right? There's a tangible biological transfer there.
A physical connection, yes.
But a footprint.
Yes.
It is literally just displaced dirt. How on earth did they justify a permanent magical connection to a hole in the mud?
Well, you have to remember, it is not just displaced boat to a mind operating under contagious magic. It is a physical impression of the self.
Oh, I see.
The foot touched the earth, and the earth retained the exact shape of that foot. Therefore, the earth at that specific location has absorbed a literal fraction of the person's essence.
Wow.
Yeah. The text documents practices where you could actually cripple or injure an enemy by striking their footprint with a weapon.
You just stab the dirt.
You stab the dirt. Or by dropping sharp glass or poison thorns directly into the impression left in the soil. The belief is that the injury to the footprint travels right up that invisible sympathetic tether and physically strikes the person's foot, no matter how far away they are.
Which means you are constantly leaving vulnerabilities behind you wherever you walk. That is terrifying.
It would be incredibly stressful, yes.
And it's not just footprints either. The fear surrounding discarded body parts is intense in these cultures.
Very intense.
The text explicitly mentions the deep anxiety over what happens to, like, cut hair or cast baby teeth.
Yeah.
And particularly the navel string and the afterbirth.
Yes, the afterbirth is a major focal point in many cultures.
Right, like in parts of Africa and China, the text says the afterbirth is not just biological waste. It is intimately bound up with the person's ultimate destiny.
Because it was in ultimate contact with the person.
Exactly. If a malicious sorcerer gets a hold of your cast teeth or your hair clippings, they don't even need to bother making a wax figure of you. They have a piece of your actual essence.
And this brings us to a really critical realization about the mindset of early humanity. They were not acting out of random, chaotic superstition.
We were just being crazy.
No, not at all. They were acting out of a deeply rigid, highly structured belief in a universally connected system.
So they actually had the right idea about a mechanical universe governed by cause and effect.
Yes. The foundational logic is there.
They just had a fundamentally flawed operating manual. They thought the lever was connected to the rain gear, but really it was just a stick stuck in the mud.
That is precisely what Fraser identifies as the fatal flaw of magic. Magic postulates a strict natural order and immutable laws. The universe is not run by capricious entities who might suddenly change their minds.
It's an automaton.
Exactly. Magic simply misidentifies what the laws actually are. It assumes that similarity and contact are the foundational laws of physics.
So if you are living in a society that believes this mechanical operating manual is absolutely 100% real, the next logical step is figuring out who gets to hold the manual, right?
Right. The social hierarchy begins to form around this knowledge.
Because if you are the one person in the tribe who knows the exact chant to make the frog croak, or you know the exact salve to put on the rusty spear, you aren't just like a helpful local mechanic. You hold the keys to reality.
And this initiates a massive shift in human social organization. The text heavily maps the rise of what Fraser calls the public magician.
Right, because before this, magic was private.
Exactly. Everyone was doing their own footprint magic, hoarding their own hair clippings, trying to protect themselves. But as society grows and becomes more complex, we see the emergence of what is arguably the oldest professional class in human history.
The professional sorcerer.
Yes. The division of labor is a hallmark of civilization. Not everyone needs to farm, not everyone needs to hunt. So a community will intentionally support an individual whose sole specialization is attempting to control nature for the public good.
So you dedicate your entire life to perfecting the homeopathic rituals. You become the public magician. And honestly, this isn't some selfless civil service position.
No, it was highly lucrative.
Oh, incredibly. These magicians begin to accumulate extraordinary wealth. People are constantly paying them for protection, for rain, for successful hunts. And with that kind of wealth comes profound political power.
They consolidate authority.
Yeah, they evolved from just being the village-centric into chiefs and eventually right into kings.
The transition from sorcerer to sovereign is heavily documented in the sources. The text specifically details how African rainmakers rose to absolute chieftainship.
Which makes total sense when you think about it.
It does. In an agrarian society where a single month of drought means mass starvation for the entire community, the individual who ostensibly controls the weather is undeniably the most important person in the hierarchy. Their political authority is entirely derived from their perceived magical competence.
We call them magician kings. But let's go back to that scenario we opened the whole deep dive with.
The king in the drought.
Yes. You are the magician king. You rode this wave of homeopathic rainmaking right to the top, right to the throne. You were wearing the crown, and then a severe drought hits.
And it doesn't break.
Right, it lasts a week. Then a month. The crops turn to absolute dust. Your entire claim to power is that you control the levers of the universe.
Right.
So you can't just release a press statement saying, sorry, folks, we're experiencing unseasonable weather patterns.
You cannot blame the climate, because according to the social contract, you are the climate.
Exactly.
And the text notes the grim reality of this arrangement. These kings were held strictly accountable to their magical claims. In places like Savage Island or ancient Egypt, kings were severely punished, they were exiled, and routinely put to death if they failed to end a drought or a famine.
The logic of the people is brutal, but honestly, it's entirely consistent.
It is perfectly logical within their framework. If the machine of the universe has stopped providing, the machine operator is either intentionally malicious or utterly incompetent.
Yeah.
In either scenario, the operator must be violently removed and replaced.
The psychological toll of that must have been just staggering. I mean, you were living in a constant state of performance anxiety where a dry spell means your literal execution.
It's an incredible amount of pressure.
And as these societies evolve, the text points out this really fascinating adaptation to that pressure. Fraser distinguishes between two different types of man-gods that emerge during this timeline.
Right, there's an evolutionary split. The first is what we have been discussing up to this point, the magical type of man-god.
The engineer.
Yes, this is the sorcerer, the engineer. His power resides entirely in his technique, his knowledge of the spells, and his mastery of those hidden levers. If the rain fails, it is a direct failure of his technique. But as the centuries progress, we see the emergence of the inspired or religious type of man-god.
And this is just a brilliant political pivot, because the inspired man-god isn't the engineer, they are a vessel.
Precisely. This new type of leader claims that the power does not originate from within their own mastery of nature. Instead, they say they are possessed, inspired, or chosen by a higher external entity.
They're just the middleman.
They are merely a conduit. And this subtly but profoundly shifts the blame. If the rain doesn't come, it isn't because the king performed the ritual poorly. It is because the higher entity is displeased with the people or has its own inscrutable reasons.
It's the ultimate plausible deniability. Hey, don't look at me, guys. The sky spirit said no.
It protects the sovereign.
It completely protects them. And that exact shift from the arrogant engineer claiming to control the universe to the humble vessel channeling a higher power brings us right to the brink of what has to be the greatest intellectual crisis in human history.
Because eventually the fatal flaw of magic becomes impossible to ignore. The text refers to this as the detection of the fallacy of magic.
Right, and this realization doesn't just happen overnight, obviously.
Oh no, it takes millennia. The human mind is incredibly adept at protecting its core beliefs. When a frog dance is followed by a thunderstorm, the belief is cemented. The system works.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly. But when a frog dance is followed by a month of drought, the magician will inevitably invent 1,000 excuses.
Oh, yeah. Like, I sneezed during the third chant, or someone in the village was harboring negative energy, or, my favorite, a rival tribe is using counter magic to block our rain lever.
There is always an out. There is always a reason the magic failed that preserves the underlying theory of magic itself.
But generation after generation, century after century, this creeping, undeniable realization begins to set in among the most observant minds of early humanity.
The thinkers, the philosophers of the tribe.
Right. They watch these kings get executed, they watch crops fail, despite absolutely perfect ritual adherence. And they realize that the levers they have been pulling, they aren't attached to any gears.
They are disconnected from reality.
The homeopathic imitations and the contagious bonds are not actually compelling nature to do anything at all.
The mechanical universe theory completely crumbles.
And imagine the existential terror of that moment. You thought you had the steering wheel to reality, and suddenly you realize you were just sitting in a box, hurtling through a dark, chaotic void with absolutely no control.
It would be a profound psychological shock.
It is out of this profound disillusionment, this terrifying crisis of faith, that the age of religion is finally born.
Yes. As the belief in human magic declines, the belief in external deities grows to fill that void. And the text offers a very specific definition of religion for this framework.
How does Fraser define it?
It states that religion contains both a theoretical and a practical element, and crucially, and this is important, it is fundamentally opposed in principle to magic.
This is where the paradigm entirely flips for humanity.
Complete 180.
Humans realize they aren't the CEOs of the universe. The machine doesn't care about their levers. So the human mind, desperate for some kind of order, makes a massive new assumption. If the universe isn't a machine, it must be a kingdom.
A kingdom ruled by someone else.
Right. There must be invisible CEOs, gods, spirits, demons who are actually running the show.
The theoretical element of religion is this projection of conscious, personal agencies onto the natural world. Instead of impersonal forces of physics, the storm is driven by an angry sky god.
The harvest is controlled by a temperamental earth mother.
Exactly. The practical element of religion is how humans respond to this new theory. Religion replaces the concept of compulsion with propitiation.
Propitiation.
Yeah.
Appeasement. Begging. Basically, instead of pulling a lever, you are writing an email asking for a massive favor.
That's a very modern way to look at it, but yes.
You humanize the universe. You think to yourself, well, I get angry when people disrespect me, and I like it when people give me gifts. The sky didn't rain today, so the sky must be angry at me. I need to give the sky a gift.
And so the methods of interaction change entirely. You abandon the imitative dances meant to force the clouds. Instead, you offer human sacrifice. You engage in prayer.
You bring the first fruits of your harvest to an altar.
Or you perform animal sacrifices, slaughtering an ox to appease the rain god. The underlying assumption here is one of utter humility. You are officially admitting your own powerlessness and throwing yourself completely on the mercy of a conscious, albeit invisible, entity.
It's just a complete collapse of the human ego. I mean, we go from, I command the elements with my mind, to, please, great spirit, spare our miserable lives.
It's a humbling transition.
But this transition isn't clean, right? It's not like the calendar flipped and suddenly everyone traded their wax voodoo dolls for prayer beads.
Yeah.
Human history is incredibly, incredibly messy.
It is a protracted period of deep confusion, strange combinations, and eventually bitter conflict.
The messy middle.
Yes. The transition from magic to religion took millennia. The historical antagonism between the two, where religion actively hunts down magic, is actually a comparatively late development. For centuries, they were thoroughly and bizarrely combined.
The text gives us some really wild examples of this overlap. Look at ancient Egypt, for
A
instance.
prime example.
You have this massive religious structure with temples and complex gods, but you still have these magicians operating within that system who claim they can actually, literally, compel the deities.
They aren't just praying.
No, they are threatening the gods. It's like saying, hey, I'm humbly asking you for rain, but if you don't give it to me, I know the secret ancient magic word that will physically force your hand.
The Egyptian magicians represent a perfect hybrid of the two eras. They acknowledge the conscious deities of religion, but they apply the mechanical compulsion of magic to control them.
It's wild.
Furthermore, the gods themselves were often conceptualized as ultimate sorcerers. They didn't just rule by divine fiat, they ruled because they possessed superior magical knowledge.
Even the gods use magic.
Exactly. The text also notes how the worship of the dead in places like Melanesia and even throughout modern Europe was heavily blended with magic. People would pray to their ancestors for guidance, but simultaneously use magical charms to bind those same spirits or force them to act.
It's humanity just hedging its bets, you know. I'll pray to the river god just in case, but I'm also going to do the frog dance because why risk it?
Use every tool available.
Right. But eventually, this coexistence breaks down and a massive turf war erupts.
Yeah.
And if you look at the sociology of it, it's entirely about power and authority. Religion becomes inherently hostile to magic.
The hostility is inevitable when you examine the figures leading these two camps. Consider the priest.
Okay.
The priest derives his entire societal status from his role as an intermediary. He stands before the people and openly admits he has no inherent power. He is merely a servant begging the gods on their behalf. His authority requires the populace to accept their own powerlessness.
Right. He needs them to be dependent.
Then consider the magician. The magician stands in the exact same village and claims to control the forces of nature independently without needing the god's permission at all.
The magician is a walking, talking existential threat to the priest's monopoly on reality. I mean, picture it. The priest tells the village, we must humble ourselves, wear sackcloth, and fast for 3 days so the gods might pity us and cure this plague. Yeah. And the magician is standing in the back of the crowd shouting, or you could just give me a lock of the sick guy's hair in a wax doll, and I'll have the problem solved by midnight.
The magician represents a rebellious, dangerous arrogance in the eyes of the new religious order. To the priest, the magician's claim to independent power is not just foolish, it is profound blasphemy.
It undermines the whole system.
It undermines the absolute authority of the divine. This ideological clash necessitates a historical campaign of eradication. The old ways, the mechanical levers, had to be violently stamped out to consolidate the new religious worldview.
And the text doesn't shy away from how dark this eradication gets. It heavily references the Christian Church's treatment of witches as this ultimate expression of religion trying to annihilate magic.
The witch hunts.
Yeah, but there is a detail in the index that is so highly specific and honestly so deeply ironic, it's almost hard to believe. It talks about Sprenger, this famous and utterly ruthless inquisitor.
Yes, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. They were instrumental in the European witch hunts. They wrote the Malleus Maleficarum.
Right. And the text highlights a really specific interrogatory practice of his. When Sprenger was preparing to interrogate or torture an accused witch or wizard, he mandated that the prisoner's head, and often their entire body, be completely shaved of all hair.
Every single hair.
And you'd think, okay, maybe that's for hygiene in a medieval dungeon or just a psychological intimidation tactic to strip them of their dignity, right?
That would be the logical assumption.
But no. The text explains why he did it. Sprenger did it because he genuinely believed that a sorcerer's magical strength was physically bound up in their hair.
It is the exact same homeopathic magic we discussed earlier regarding the ancient kings who couldn't cut their hair.
Yes. The Inquisitor, the ultimate representative of pure submissive religion, is utilizing ancient, contagious, and homeopathic magical logic to defeat a magician.
He believes the hair is a physical lever of power.
It's mind-blowing. He is literally using magic to fight magic.
Yeah.
All while claiming to be entirely reliant on God. It perfectly demonstrates just how deeply ingrained the magical mindset was, even in the very people dedicating their lives to destroying it.
And eradication wasn't limited to just the violence of the Inquisitions. The religious authorities also engaged in a massive systemic campaign of cultural assimilation.
They absorbed them.
Yes. They realized they could not entirely stop the populace from engaging in ancient magical rites, so they aggressively rebranded them. The text documents how the church deliberately timed its great festivals to displace and absorb heathen magical ones.
It was a hostile corporate takeover of the calendar.
Very much so.
The text lists them out. Christmas wasn't just randomly assigned to December. It was strategically placed to overlay the Mithraic winter solstice festival.
Right. The ancient celebration of the rebirth of the physical sun was rebranded as the birth of the religious Son of God.
And Easter was directly superimposed over ancient vernal festivals that celebrated the cyclical death and homeopathic resurrection of the vegetation gods.
Exactly. And the midsummer festivals, which were ancient, deeply magical fire festivals, meant to homeopathically encourage the sun's heat and contagiously purify the crops, they were merged with St. John's Day.
Because the priests couldn't stop the European peasants from lighting the massive bonfires anyway, right?
Right. So they simply declared that the bonfires were now lit in honor of St. John. Problem solved.
But despite all of this, despite the burnings at the stake, the head shaving, the calendar rebranding, the absolute societal dominance of the priest over the sorcerer, the deep dive reveals a shocking conclusion from Fraser.
The persistence of magic.
Magic never actually died.
It is perhaps the most profound sociological statement derived from Fraser's index. The text suggests a reality that makes modern religious institutions deeply uncomfortable.
Oh, they hate this idea.
The belief in magic and witchcraft is fundamentally more permanent, more deeply rooted in the human psyche than the great historical religions.
That is a massive statement.
It is. Empires rise and fall, pantheons are completely replaced, theological doctrines are rewritten over and over, but the underlying primal belief in sympathetic magic remains stubbornly, quietly entrenched.
The index shows how European peasants, for centuries after they had been officially baptized and considered themselves devout Christians, were continually, actively using magic in their daily lives.
And they never stopped.
They were lighting those midsummer fires. They were carrying hold flints in their pockets to ward off evil spirits. They were ringing church bells during thunderstorms.
And they weren't ringing them to call the village to prayer.
No. They were using the sheer sonic force of the consecrated bell as a literal magical weapon to physically drive away the witches they believed were causing the lightning.
Or consider the reliance on botanical magic. The text references the meticulous gathering of specific herbs like St. John's wort, mugwort, or fern seed. These were not gathered randomly. They were harvested on highly specific, magically potent nights, like Walpurgis Night or Halloween, specifically to serve as protective wards against demons.
And these peasants experienced no cognitive dissonance about this. They attended Mass, they took communion, they prayed to God for their eternal souls. But when a physical threat appeared, when the crops were failing, or a cow suddenly fell ill, they reverted instantly to the old levers.
They practiced magic.
They trusted the priest to get them into heaven, but they trusted the mugwort to save the cow.
The old operating system was always running in the background.
Always. So let's step back and look at this grand timeline Fraser lays out. We have magic, the flawed machine of cause and effect. Then we have religion, the era of bowing to the invisible CEOs. But Fraser says there's a third stage.
Yes.
How does science fit into this?
To understand the final destination of human intellectual evolution, the text references the philosopher Hegel's thoughts on the matter, concluding that the grand movement of thought flows from magic to religion to science. And here is the crucial, deeply counterintuitive insight Fraser offers.
Okay, lay it on us.
Magic, despite its fatal flaws, despite the bizarre rituals and the wax dolls and eating hawk hearts, is what actually paved the way for modern science.
Hold on. Because I am looking at this timeline. You have a guy eating a mole's heart to see in the dark and doing a homeopathic dance to make a cloud weep. And you were telling me that is the intellectual grandfather of the scientific method.
That is what the text argues.
That feels like a massive leap.
Oh,
Honestly, religion feels closer to science because at least theology requires structured philosophical debate and complex written doctrine.
it feels like a leap until you examine the epistemology, the underlying theory of knowledge. Religion fundamentally interrupts the search for natural laws.
How so?
Religion says that the universe is governed by conscious entities who possess free will. If a god has free will, the universe is inherently unpredictable. Water boils today because God allows it. Tomorrow, if God is angry, water might freeze when you heat it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Religion relies on miracles, which are, by definition, suspensions of the natural order.
Okay, I see exactly where you're going with this. If a miracle is possible, physics isn't a rule, it's just a suggestion.
Exactly. Magic, on the other hand, strictly denies the miracle. Magic taught humanity to look for a consistent natural order. It posited that the universe was governed by immutable laws.
Cause and effect.
Yes, if you perform action A, result B will happen every single time, without exception. It stripped away the unpredictable whims of the personal gods. Religion said, the universe is a kingdom, pray for mercy. Magic said, the universe is a machine, figure out how it works.
Magic just had the wrong rules.
Exactly.
They were operating on the assumption that the fundamental laws of physics were like produces like and things once in contact stay in contact instead of, gravity, electromagnetism, or thermodynamics.
But that underlying bedrock assumption that there are blind, discoverable rules governing reality is the exact same foundation that all modern science rests upon.
That is incredible.
Science takes the fundamental premise of magic, a universe of consistent impersonal laws, and finally replaces the flawed associations of the primitive mind with empirical observation, mathematics, and rigorous testing.
So magic was the intellectual chrysalis from which science eventually emerged.
It just required a long, painful, necessary incubation period during the age of religion to refine human thought.
Man. So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive? It means that magic wasn't just foolish superstition or chaotic nonsense. It was humanity's very first rough draft of physics.
That's the perfect way to phrase it.
It was our ancient ancestors looking out at a terrifyingly random, violent world and bravely attempting to impose order on it. They were trying to figure out the rules of the game so they could survive.
It represents the absolute dawn of the analytical human mind, however misguided its initial desperate conclusions were.
This has been just a massive journey through the source material. We started with the physical levers of contagious and homeopathic magic, where treating a bleeding arm meant you carefully bandaged the rusty sword that stabbed you.
And we saw the rise of the very first public professionals, the magicians.
Right, accumulating power until they became magician kings, carrying the literal crushing weight of the weather on their shoulders.
We observed the humbling birth of religion when those magical levers undeniably failed, leading to an era of propitiation, where humanity projected its own emotions into the heavens and begged invisible entities for survival.
And we tracked the messy, violent turf wars between the intermediary priests and the independent sorcerers, only to discover that the old magical instincts never really left us. They just hid behind church bells and midsummer herbs, secretly keeping the concept of a rule-bound universe alive until the scientific revolution could finally take the reins.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question to explore on your own.
Oh, I love these.
Fraser shows us that magic was based on a mistaken association of ideas that felt completely 100% rational to the people practicing it. The healer thought treating the weapon instead of the wound was just obvious, empirical reality. It was simply how the world worked.
Right.
So as we sit securely in our modern age of science, armed with our data sets, our algorithms, and our peer-reviewed methodologies, what deeply held, perfectly rational associations in our current worldview might future generations look back on as our very own version of sympathetic magic?
Man, that is a thought that is going to stick with me. Will historians in 500 years look at our current theories of economics or sociology or even psychology the exact same way we look at a guy eating a hawk's heart to improve his eyesight?
It's entirely possible.
Will they see us pulling invisible levers, completely confident that we know how the machine works, while we're entirely missing the actual gears? It really makes you look at the entirety of human understanding with a lot more humility.
It certainly does.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope exploring Fraser's timeline gave you some clarity on how we got here, and we encourage you to keep questioning the hidden roots of your own beliefs. We'll catch you next time.